Hello, Crafty Crandall here, and today I wanted to talk about my most disappointing reads of 2020. I have 5 total books on this list. The first 2 that I'm going to talk about were actually sequels in a duology, so I'm going to talk about them kind of more vaguely and try to give you my reasons for why they were so disappointing. But, being sequels, I think that it's more obvious that I had enjoyed the first book and didn't necessarily enjoy the second book. The final 3 books on this list are all either standalones or the first book in their series, which I will not be continuing. So, without any further ado, let's talk about the books, shall we? The first book on this list is actually the only one that I have in a physical copy, and that is Iona or Iona. I'm truly not sure how it's pronounced. But I had read the first book in this series, which I believe is pronounced Eon, or at least it's spelled like the English Eon, and really enjoyed it. I honestly thought that these were going to be books that I was going to be able to put into a video expressing a relationship between these books and the Poppy War in sort of like a if you liked this, you'd like this kind of way, because the Poppy War is such a popular series, and I don't know that this series ever got its popularity. So I was planning on doing that video after reading this book, but sadly I got, let's see here, 484 pages into this book out of 630 something pages, and I couldn't finish it. It was so disappointing. So Eon is a book that follows a girl who has been training basically her whole life to be able to call upon a god during its rising, essentially. So there are 12 gods in this series, and she is the only female who is participating in the potential rising of this god. So there are 12 candidates, each trained by specific warlords, and they are all being tasked with trying to, be the one chosen by this god to carry out its power through the world. So in that way, the series is extremely similar to the Poppy War. It focuses on gods. It has more of an Asian influence on it. It's clearly more of an Asian country that this series is set in, and I really loved those influences. I thought that it was a really interesting series. Eon or Iona is, disguised as a boy throughout the series, throughout the first book in the series, and when it comes out that she is a female, that brings about a whole wave of like cultural change and interest, and there were a lot of really neat character-driven elements to the story that unfortunately weren't really carried through in the sequel. So the sequel, I found myself more and more frustrated with the characterizations. There was a needless love triangle that honestly just drove me insane. And although I did not finish this book, I did look up spoiler-filled reviews to know how it ended, and it ends exactly as you would expect it to end. So that was also frustrating. So I did not like this book at all. It was extremely disappointing after I had liked the first novel so much. And there were some characters in here that I did like. So Della, she is what is known in the series as a contraire, but is essentially a man who prefers to portray herself as a woman. And I really appreciated like that. She was a really well thought out, well delivered character, and I really enjoyed her. There are other characters in the book who are decent, but our main character, Iona, or Eon, however you pronounce her name, or however it is throughout different points in the series, because she does kind of change how she even views herself internally. She hasn't spoken her true name in so long, and she kind of has to go through a mental shift to perceiving herself as Iona. So, yeah, she was a little bit frustrating. Some of the side characters were equally frustrating. I didn't understand their point, and they didn't really add anything to the plot, so that was a little bit frustrating. And overall, I DNF'd this book, but I would probably end up giving it a 2 stars if I were to rate it. I left it unrated on my Goodreads because I didn't finish it. But overall, definitely a very disappointing read of 2020. The next book on this list is Shiny Broken Pieces, and I apologize if I mispronounced the authors, but I believe they're pronounced Sona Chayapotra and Danielle Clayton. This book is the sequel to Tiny Pretty Things, which I read because I have a strange fascination with ballet. I hate dancing. I never dance. I've never danced in my life. I've never been a ballerina. I've never even conceived of something like that. But I am fascinated by the rigors that these girls put themselves through in order to portray, mastery of an art form such as dance. I find that fascinating. It's very similar to, any art form that you're going to pursue, and I really like the concept. So I went into Tiny Pretty Things expecting, I don't want to say more of a focus on ballet because the entire book is 100% focused on ballet, but at the same time, there is so much drama that goes on in these books. I feel I would have enjoyed them much more if I had read these books as a teenager. I think this series was exactly what I would have loved in my teenage years when I was reading series like The Clique, Private, and series similar to that where drama really is the primary focus of the series. And so it was disappointing as an adult reader, I feel. But the sequel it was even worse. So I liked Tiny Pretty Things for what it was. Once I realized that it was going to be drama focused, I accepted that and read it and enjoyed it. It was a decent book. I am going to be watching the Netflix series, which I believe comes out tonight. And so I was excited about that, and yet when I read the sequel, I didn't like how the characters just devolved. It was terrible. They had gone through all of these things in the first novel, and then to start the second novel and just not be in a place of understanding, like it didn't feel like any of them had learned anything from the entire plot of the first book. So that was disappointing to see. I didn't like some of the new characters that were introduced. Cassie and Henry are just not characters for me. And so I ended up giving this book, I think, 2 stars. And it was just really disappointing. I thought that, once I had gotten rid of my notions of like this being a more adult book, and, I went into it expecting the level of drama that it had, it just it didn't go in the direction that I thought it would go. So it was a disappointing read. The third book on this list is a book that I've talked about pretty frequently on my channel, so I'm not going to go into a whole huge detail here. But that is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. This book was extremely disappointing. I thought it was going to be something that it wasn't, and I think this is what happens when you go into a book with certain expectations and you don't really know. Your expectations are misbased. You didn't have the right expectations going in, and so the book is disappointing. I think that's what happened here. I thought that the book was going to take, a more character-driven turn. I thought that at some point we would be shown information instead of just being, told it all. But it never really happened. The entire book was very, I don't even know. It was difficult to read. The way that it was written was just tough. And I didn't I liked the main character. I thought that she was, an interesting character, but I did not like Orion. I didn't really I liked one of the side characters, actually. She was pretty good, but for the most part, this book was just overall a disappointment in how it was told, in where the plot went. The plot, I feel like, didn't need to go where it went, so it was frustratingly told, and the way that it got to where it got was just wholly unnecessary. And then the ending, I've said it before, but the ending of that book was so infuriating that I 100% will not be picking up the sequel. So it was just overall a complete disappointment. and I should probably have DNF'd it. Although now I am glad that I didn't, just because I know now that I won't read the sequel, just because of like the very last like 2 pages of the book. The next book on this list I have also talked about. I actually did a reading vlog voicing my opinions on this book, which I will link for you up above. But that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I can't make this video without including it, so here it is. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue was such a disappointment. The premise of this book is that Addie LaRue has basically signed a contract with the devil that he can have her soul once she allows him to have it, and in exchange she gets to live forever. And so, as part of this deal, if you will, she is henceforth forgotten by everybody who she comes in contact with. As soon as she is no longer, you know, within eyesight or within the same confines of a room together, she is immediately forgotten by them. It was a really interesting premise. I liked the premise a lot. I liked Addie as a character for the most part, and I really liked Luke and thought that he was a very interesting demon, a very interesting villain. I appreciated the vastness of his powers and, you know, all of the scenes that he demonstrated that. But I did not like the fact that I went into this book thinking that it was an adventure novel, and it was nothing of the sort. Okay, here we go. I succumbed to the hype of this book. I was so invested in it. I was so excited because everybody was so excited. And I did not like this book as much as I thought I would. I have read other V.E. Schwab books and really, really, really enjoyed them. But I've found that some of her books just aren't for me. And this was one of them. This book I went into with the expectation, again, perhaps just like a misled expectation, that this was going to be a book about a girl who went on this crazy lifelong adventure and really utilized her lot in life, if you will, which, albeit she chose, but we'll get there in a second, that utilized her lot in life to really make something of herself and just, you know, do all of this exploration, have an adventure. This book was more so I don't want to say like a retelling of her life, but it was not told in the way that I thought it was going to be told. I thought that we would be following her through time, which we do, but I thought that we'd, I guess, be following her through time and space. I didn't realize that she was going to stay so stationary throughout like most of this book. And it was really disappointing that we didn't get to explore more of the world. Like, we know that she herself has explored more of the world because she tells us that in her various musings, but we don't get to see any of that. And it really frustrated me. I didn't like how the book didn't include all of those things. I mean, the only time that we saw her travel was because either Luke transported her places, or one time because she was escaping from a war that was outbreaking. Overall, I don't know if I just went into it with the wrong expectation or if it just under-delivered on what I thought it was going to be, but this book was not for me, sadly to say. It was a huge disappointment. And the final book on this list is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Now, this book was another one that was so highly regarded in BookTube, and I was so excited to read it when it came out. So I read it almost immediately when it came out, and I have to say, I just wish that it had ended. I wish that it had ended halfway through. At the halfway point, I felt the book was perfect. It was so interesting. It was thought-provoking. It was very, very interesting. And then it fell apart. So the book follows the main character, whose name I don't even remember right now, because that's how terribly unmemorable this story was, when it should have been like devastatingly thought-provoking and memorable. But we follow her perspective as she is going through school and ends up basically, I don't want to say falling in love with, but essentially I mean, I guess you could say essentially falling in love with her teacher. She's a 15-year-old girl, he's a however old man, and it's obviously an inappropriate relationship. And so it was very interesting, and just like the whole premise of it was great. She did a great job, like I said, the first half of the book. But then after the midpoint of the book, I just felt like it fell flat on its face. We didn't need the entire end of the book, in my opinion. Like, it didn't lend any more to the story. It didn't make me feel any better about the characters. It didn't make me feel, better about the situation that had happened. It was so frustratingly slow to get to its point. And, like, when it finally got there, it was unrealistic. It didn't feel like that was actually what would have happened, and it didn't feel like the resolution was actually a resolution. It felt like it could have continued to spiral from there, and it didn't really feel like any progress had been made. So it was really just a disappointment all around. Like, if the book had ended at the halfway point, I would have given it 5 out of 5 stars. The book instead ended where it did, and I don't remember how many stars I gave it, but it was just very disappointing. So there you have it. There are my most disappointing reads of 2020. Please, please, please like this video if you liked it. Let me know what your most disappointing reads of 2020 were down in the comments below. And please subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every single Tuesday on art and book related topics, and I'd love to have you around. Thank you so much. See you next time. Bye!